I'm Katherine Coates, and I lead a team of multidisciplinary earthquake engineers in Arab London. And I'm going to, I think, really take a step back and talk a bit more about, first of all, what makes earthquake disasters a bit different from other types of natural disasters, and what are those characteristics that impact how we respond to that risk? What are the challenges? And this is more about what we can do before an earthquake hits, and also what we can do in the longer term recovery period. So earthquakes, compared to other natural disasters, they're rare events. They're often high consequence events. So where you might have a tropical storm hitting a certain island, once a year, like unfortunately Haiti, this happens in Haiti as well. Haiti might experience a major earthquake once every 200 years. And what that means is that in many places that have serious earthquake risk, people haven't experienced a major earthquake in their lifetime. They haven't seen earthquake damage. They haven't seen that impact. And so one of the things I'm very interested in is, how do we create an awareness of earthquake risk, and how do we get people to invest and care about reducing that risk? So I think we've already seen some examples from the other speakers, but I would just like to compare two events. One of them is actually one I experienced as a child in California, which was the Loma Prieta earthquake, which hit the Bay Area. And it was a major event. It had large economic losses, only 57 deaths. And when you compare that to the event in Haiti, similar magnitude in 2010, we still are not sure how many people died. There's a bit of uncertainty, but we think a conservative estimate might be 70,000 deaths. So you can see there's an enormous difference. And so why is that? Why were there only 57 deaths in the Bay Area in California versus 70,000? And this also touches on the different effects on developing countries versus developed countries. So in Haiti, we had a lot of, there wasn't really a seismic building code. There are issues with governance. It's quite an extreme situation, very little construction monitoring. And they had a lot of construction in heavy concrete slabs, not detailed to resist earthquakes, and also unreinforced masonry and even rubble masonry. And a lot of people died in those buildings when they collapsed. In the U.S., we have timber construction because it's available. It's not that we're virtuous and we know that constructing timber is going to save earthquake lives, but that's just most housing and a lot of other buildings are made of timber. There are rigorous building codes that have evolved over time. There's more construction monitoring. So the people who died in that earthquake were mostly in a freeway collapse, which was to do with site soil effects that hadn't been accounted in the design, and also some falling unreinforced masonry. So that gives you an idea of the different impacts it can have in different countries. So I guess then my next question is, what can we do about this? What can we do? How can we reduce risk in a smart way? How can we focus our investment? How can we convince people? And I think this is a very relevant topic right now. I literally walked out of the tube and saw another article about the Grenfell Tower fire, which killed, as far as we know, 79 people. And I think this is an example of an incident, an event, where it's unacceptable to society. It's unacceptable for people to die in a tower block fire in London just because we haven't put the right regulations in place. We haven't monitored the construction. We cannot accept that. And I think we see that actions are now finally being taken. Another similar incident would be the Rana Plaza factory collapse in Bangladesh, where 1,200 people were killed. And this was due to, again, unregulated construction, poor quality construction, overloading. But it has triggered hundreds of assessments and enormous investment in improving factories and improving general construction in Bangladesh. So what, for me, the equivalent example for earthquakes, and maybe I'm biased because I do a lot of work in this area, but is school safety. It is unacceptable for communities and for internationally for large numbers of school children to die in earthquakes. And we have seen this happen in many places. And so what I'd like to talk about just for a few minutes, because I know we've been here almost an hour already, is give some examples of, in different countries, one, the US, California, where I'm from, and one, Nepal, which we've been hearing about, where people have made efforts to improve school safety, and they've been very successful. So the story in California is quite interesting because there was an earthquake in 1933. It was a magnitude 6, which is pretty significant, and 120 people were killed. But actually, it was very fortunate because it happened, many, many schools collapsed and were severely damaged, unreinforced masonry schools, and it happened just outside of school hours. So if it had happened during school hours, they estimate that 6,000 children could have been killed and teachers. And this was a huge wake-up call that California needed to change the way it designed schools, change the type of construction for schools, how construction was monitored. And indeed, 30 days later, the Field Act was passed, which started instituting some of these new regulations and practices. And soon after that, this act was expanded to apply to retrofitting schools as well. And one little bit of information in that act that I find very interesting, and I'll touch on this more in the Nepal example as well, is that it had a provision that if 10% of the parents in an individual school were concerned about that school and felt that school should be assessed, that it had to be assessed. And if that assessment found any deficiencies, that a retrofit would have to be done over a certain period of time. And I think that touches on a really important point about earthquake risk and preparedness and every aspect of it. It has to come from the people. It has to be driven by communities, because often a politician who's in office, like some of these politicians who ignored the fire in my neighborhood in Stockwell, which killed 6 people a few years ago, they don't have these longer term incentives. So it's about creating awareness of the risk so that the process can come not just from government officials or people in different sectors, but actually, the general public and the communities themselves. And I think that Red R's work, from what I know about it, actually focuses a lot on capacity building and, giving that awareness and preparedness to the communities themselves. So to move on to the second example for Nepal, I don't know if any of you are familiar with NSET, but it's a local technical earthquake engineering organization in Nepal, and they've been around for a while. And one of the first things they recognized was that, and this is focused initially on the Kathmandu Valley, which actually was not far from the 2015 earthquake, was that many of the schools in Nepal were highly vulnerable to earthquakes. And indeed, after they assessed schools in the valley, they determined that 2/3 of them were likely to collapse in the kind of earthquake that we just had in 2015. So they started a school safety program that addressed new construction of schools in terms of design, in terms of improving design, training for people who built schools, and retrofitting schools, as well as emergency preparedness training for teachers and students. And one of the things that was very important was that they used locally available materials, local construction techniques that could be employed by people who build these types of buildings normally, not international experts, but people who are building buildings there routinely. And also these retrofits were led by the community, and they had ownership in them. And so it comes back to this capacity building, this, as was said before, oh, well, we have an international building code, but in a lot of parts of the world, you can't follow those types of codes. They don't work. They're not designed for vernacular construction, so you have to understand the local conditions. And in the 2015 earthquake, and I actually was there afterwards and was involved in a different schools program, but I saw some of these schools that NSET had retrofitted, and many of them were almost undamaged. And none of the 115 schools that they had retrofitted or reconstructed collapsed or hurt anyone. And I think this is a really important success story because it shows that, it isn't easy. These types of efforts are not easy, and they require long-term commitment, and they require community engagement, and they require engagement and awareness. But they can succeed, and we actually can do something about this problem. Thank you.